Just a reminder, next week's handout is on the tables on legacy. That'll be an interesting one. Quite a few verses there. We'll see how that goes next week, talking about legacy, eternity, those sorts of things. Look forward to that next week. But today, we're talking about the Proverbs on friendship, dealing with friends. Sorry. No, you're good. You're good. So we're going to talk about friendship this morning. So I kind of went through them all, the ones we have there, and I kind of broke them into three groups. Good influences, bad influences, and faithfulness to friendship. So I want to look at those quickly to begin with. So let's start in Proverbs 16:29. I want to look at some of these proverbs that deal with the bad influences that people can have on us. What's particularly interesting as we look at these three examples of them is the sorts of things that they talk about as rubbing off on you. Because we think about, evil companions corrupt good morals, right? And when we think about that, we may think about like our language or certain things. I want to pay particular attention to what the proverb writer outlines as the sorts of problems that rub off on us from other people. Because I think they're interesting. So Proverbs 16:29, a man of violence entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. So that's the first one. The second one is 17:4. An evildoer listens to wicked lips, and a liar gives ear to a mischievous tongue. And then the third example is in chapter 22, starting in verse 24. Proverbs 22:24 and 25. Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. So it's kind of interesting. We get a few proverbs here. What are the examples, first of all? Easy question to start it off with. What are the examples he gives of the sorts of like bad company, the way it rubs off on you? What are some of those things? Anger. We just read that one. Yeah, anger. It's interesting. Liars. First one was back in 1629. Evil ways. Violence. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Spite. Yeah, spitefulness. What do you make of that? Is that an interesting list to you all? Is it uninteresting? Is it what you'd expect? Yeah, the first thing that strikes you is like, well, who hangs out with violent people? Like that's the, kind of my first thought is like, I don't know that those are the sorts of people you want to be friends with, right? Which, I guess is the point, right? Yeah.
Well, they may not lie all the time or fight all the time or be angry all the time.
Yeah.
And so you're coaxed into a relationship with them, and then all of a sudden things start exploding around.
Right. It isn't that they have to be like that all the time, but they could be vices that they have that affect you, right? Don made the point that it's like characteristics of children, which is true, right? Like, which is interesting on a number of levels, but like kids lie, but when they're really little, they lie, but not because they're liars, it's because they don't understand the difference between truth and untruth. So they just say things, right? And they don't know whether it's true or a lie or whatever else. They're just saying something. Right? They don't really know any better. You have to teach them, no, that's a lie. It's not true. You can't say things aren't true. And that's the way it is with a lot of that stuff. Like kids have tempers. They get mad at each other. And they're like, "Rah!" Right? Like, you took my toy. And then they start screaming or whatever. I heard Caleb, we had some friends over last night, and Caleb threatened one of the other little boys with his katana. He was like going to like stab him with his katana. He has like this little like toy sword he got for Christmas. And you're like, son, you threaten somebody with the sword, you don't get to touch it ever again, right? Like, don't behave that way. But he's mad, right? He's angry. He's like, But as we get older, hopefully we get over that stuff. But what happens if you're around people that don't mature? Then it's harder for you to mature, right? You get sucked down to that same sort of thing. It's amazing to me that those are the sorts of examples that are given because on the one hand, they are like this extreme of bad behavior, and you think, well, I wouldn't be duped into that. And yet at the same time, those are the very behaviors that can affect us and rub off on us. Fairly innocuous example, maybe. I still get really frustrated, but I used to get irrationally angry at having to hang things on the wall. I don't know why that was the thing that I couldn't handle, but I couldn't do it. It made me so mad. I was furious. It was the most painful thing in the world. And I was talking to my older brother, and somehow it came up, and it turns out he's the same way. He would get irrationally angry at having to hang things on the wall. Well, we talked about it, and turns out my dad would get irrationally angry at hanging things on the wall, and it rubbed off on us. And it's like that sort of stuff, right? Anger rubs off on people. Like you're angry, other people get angry. Like it's a way of passing these bad attributes onto each other. And what's striking about these examples isn't the negative effects of peer pressure, because we're all aware of that, right? Even as kids, parents teach you, everybody teaches you peer pressure, dangers of it, all that stuff. What's striking to me is that these examples outline things that we would assume we would be able to avoid, like violence. And yet when you're around violent people, you become violent. Why? Because you have to be. It's the only way to exist in that sort of world, right? That's then how you establish any sort of authority or interact with other people. And that's the danger of this sort of behavior, is that it creates a value system in which if you don't follow that same value system, you don't exist. And so in those circumstances, you act like that, and then you take that other places as well. And it creates all sorts of problems. Does that make sense? Any other questions, comments about that first kind of group of the bad influences? Yeah. All right.
Well, you'll also find once you become a child of Christ and you accept Him in your life, you have to change your friends a lot of times.
Yep.
You have to give up a lot of friends you had because they're not willing to change to your way.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality is, as Lenore said, sometimes that means we have to just change our acquaintances, the friends, the people that we're around because of that. Yeah.
I was just going to say that when I was a kid, we had several neighborhood gangs, and it was about wanting to fit in, wanting to belong. So you made friends with these guys, and the only way you could be friends with them was to be as violent and angry
Right.
as they were.
Right. Yeah, you want to fit in. That's what people are doing. It sucks you in, and you have to behave that way to interact that way as well. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, because it makes the kids that are drawn to this, they're protected by these violent people.
Right.
And when they learn their ways of protected, they get money and gadgets and stuff that they normally can't get, and people respect them in the area
Yeah.
for their violence.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about violence, is that you can benefit from it. That's the problem, right? And it doesn't have to be murder, right? It doesn't have to be armed robbery. Violent behavior can be angering behavior, it can be strong-arming people, that sort of stuff. It can affect people and get you what you want by being brutal, You can do it to your kids and force them to bend to your will. Now, when they get older and they're no longer your kids, it's probably going to backfire on you. But in a lot of circumstances, a show of force can manipulate people into giving you what you want, right? The biggest, strongest, meanest guy, right? Nobody's going to mess with them. Although, supposedly, all that's changed a little bit with internet bullying and all that kind of stuff. I guess the values have changed a little bit, but, I mean, even when I was in school, you don't mess with the guys on the football team because they're the biggest and the strongest. They spend the most time in the gym, Basketball players, you can mess with them. They're just tall. But the football players, you don't really mess with them, right? And I was a tennis player, so everybody messed with me. But, it's like that kind of value system, right? It gets you what you want. That's the temptation. Same with anger. If you're angrier than the other person, a lot of times the other person will back down because they're afraid of the fury, right? And you have to realize it's not the way that it works, but that's the temptation. So let's look at some of these examples of kind of positive example here of friendship. So, make sure I'm grabbing the right section. I don't know why I decided to make a key with symbols to separate these out, and I forget where my key was. So, and the
While you're deciding, can I tell you?
yeah,
The one that is 17, 20, 17, 17,
mm-hmm.
it says a friend loveth at all times. And
Yep.
if you take that as your mantra, it does away with
Yeah,
following the violent person, the spiteful person, the hateful, mean, ugly person.
right.
Because you don't have
Right.
have a friend with those qualities.
Yeah, let's read that. Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity, right? You find things out sometimes when things are difficult, when things are hard. In fact, let's go to 1824, because this builds on it as well. 1824. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Kind of same idea, right? Like the ability of someone sticking to you in difficult times. I remember when my brother was in college, we had gone to visit my granddad. And granddad was a World War II vet, grew up with a depression, kind of a hard guy, carpenter. And I remember him asking my brother, he said, "Boy, you got any friends?" My brother was like, "Yeah, granddaddy, I got lots of friends." He said, "No, you don't." And he was like, "You got 3 friends?" And he's like, "Yeah, granddaddy, I got 3 friends." He's like, "No, you don't." He said, "You got any friends that'll give you a kidney?" And my brother was like, "Yeah, I think so." He's like, "No, you don't." Anyway. He's like, "You got 1 friend, you're rich," was his point, right? And it's this idea here, right? Like, man and many companions may come to ruin. Like, the fact is, like, you see people who want to talk to everybody, want to be around everybody, want, like, popularity, right? That's different than the investment in an individual and having a connection with them, right? Like, the ability of that person to have that kind of staying power. Like, I realize that, like, and some of it's practical, right? Like, some of it is just practical because of how much time you have. I realized, in college, around a lot of people, have a lot of friends. Get out of college. Can't keep in contact with everybody. You're not around them all the time. Every now and then they pop up, you see them. If something random happens, you text them or call them and chat about it. But there's few people that you can actually stay like that close with. It's the nature of things. It's sad, maybe, but it's part of it. But those friends that you stay in contact with, they're there no matter what. That they're always going to be there. That you can call them at any time, that they'll show up, that they'll help you out. And there's that kind of benefit of that you gain with these close friends that are there. The benefit of that, recognizing that. Knowing that you have people you can depend on and vice versa. Now, of course, you want to make sure that they're not the sort of people that we talked about in the first category that are violent, angry liars that are going to, negatively influence you. You want them to be positive examples and influences on you as well. But that security is a huge thing. Why is that such a big deal? Maybe that's an obvious question, but why is it such a big deal to have that kind of staying power in your life? Because life is hard. Because it's a rare thing, right? Most people aren't like that. Most circumstances aren't like that. Things change. Stuff happens, right? Friends betray friends. It happens sometimes. But to find people who aren't like that is a rare thing. And one of the things that's really significant about it is that it shows us the nature of God. We see that a little bit closer because ultimately that's what we're like looking at and reflecting, right? Like the staying power of God, the faithfulness of God. Because the fact is, God is faithful, right? That is His character, that is His nature. But if you don't know what faithfulness is, how can you appreciate the faithfulness of God? Now, when we like latch onto that and we start to see it in other people, we say, wait a second, God is faithful like that. I know what faithfulness is. I've seen it. But God is even more faithful. And so one of the great benefits is not just the consistency and the help that you have in times of trouble of knowing the people are there, which is a big deal. But it's the way that it also connects us that little bit closer to God, to the friendship and the faithfulness that He offers, the staying power that He provides. It's a big deal. Any other thoughts, comments about that? Yeah.
I had a bridesmaid that I had kind of lost touch with, and then I learned that she had a physical problem that was very serious. So I reconnected to try to be the encouragement and the strength that I felt that she would have given me had it been the other way around. It takes the focus off of yourself and puts it on your friend, just as Jesus was willing to come and die so that all of our sins could be forgiven. Not that I'm trying to equate us with Jesus, but it's the same idea.
Yeah, this idea of putting forth the effort to be there for people. Because as much as we look to the benefits of having friends that are there for us, the fact is there are moments in which you only know what people need if you take the initiative. You can only help people the way that they need help if you take the initiative. Because we all recognize that a little bit. Like when we're hurting and in pain and suffering, like we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to draw undue attention to ourselves. We almost want to suffer alone and then be mad that we're suffering alone because it justifies our suffering in some way, right? And yet, like there's huge power and benefit in somebody else showing up and being there regardless, right? Providing that for you. And that's a big deal. And so being the sort of people who are aware and provide that when it's necessary, who show up, right? I remember when my grandmother died, we'd go up to the funeral in Georgia and seeing some of the people that showed up for my dad. And you're like, man, why are they here? Like they never met her. Like, and I asked them, I said, thanks for coming. I appreciate your coming. I'm surprised to see you. And they said, well, where else would we be? And I don't know that they had any long conversations with my dad or anything, but it means something, right? Like you're there, you showed up. You provided that assurance that you're the sort of person that's going to be there. There's a big deal to be those sorts of people. And I think that's a good kind of inspirational call, not just to have friends that are like that, but to be that kind of friend that shows up, right?
I was just going to say that technology has brought people in contact and communication and driven them all further apart. When I was a kid, we didn't have TV yet. You knew your neighbors. You hung out with your friends. You went out and you talked to people. Now, you talk to me, I've got 20,000 friends on Facebook. Maybe 3 or 4 of them you actually know. How many people know the next door neighbor anymore? They don't talk. We don't really need each other anymore. I'm self-sufficient. I've got everything I want right here on my phone, instantly. And it's just, I don't know, it's just sad that, and a lot of it is it's a responsibility.
Right.
If I'm really going to be your friend, it's a responsibility to be there for you, to make an effort. And we've gotten to where we don't want to make efforts anymore.
Yeah, it's an interesting and hard point, talking about technology age, right? And the way that we can stay in contact with people. Scroll through a news feed, catch up on all the relevant news of your friends or whatever it is. I've said before, I'm not a big fan of the social media stuff. I mean, I certainly can't say that there's no value in it or anything like that. I don't know that I'd be able to get away with that. But the fact is, I think there are real dangers of the sort of connectedness we think we can have through some of those mediums. Doesn't mean that you can't do a lot of good through it. Doesn't mean you can't provide some value. But it does mean that we need to be careful and aware that just because we've connected with somebody through the internet, it's not the same as having a conversation. It's not the same as sitting down, looking somebody in the eye, and talking with them about what's going on. I mean, those are real significant things that we share with people that we need to make sure that we develop, not just for our own benefit, but also as being a good friend towards other people. Not that we shouldn't use those things and take advantage of the blessings that we're given, but we need to make sure that we are providing true friendship, not the sort of social media friendship that sometimes we can get duped into thinking that we have. I think that's a fair point. I think it's something to consider as well, that we are friends like that are there, right, that show up, means something, right, to be those sorts of people. Any other comments before we move to the third one? Third group, that was the faithfulness of friends, I guess. And then we've got the way that our friends can positively impact us. So we talked a little bit negatively. So Proverbs 13:20 says, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. And I like this because, it's the same sort of idea, right? And with a lot of these proverbs, you read them, you think about them, and I don't know if you all are like me, but you read that and you're like, well, yeah, peer pressure, yada, 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 it's a good thing. But at the same time, do we read them and dismiss them because we think we know it, or do we read them and consider thoughtfully, who are our friends? How do they impact us? Do we actually believe and follow the proverbial wisdom within the book, right? Like that's the next level of application, right? Like you can read it, you can understand it, and be like, yeah, that's true. But if you sit there and take a moment to think about who you walk with, right? Who do you spend time with? What sort of influence do they have on you? Because whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, right? But the companions of fools will suffer harm. Like it's a truism, right? It's just the nature of the world. People affect us. And we think about it in terms of negative things, but we think about it in terms of the positive benefits we can receive from others as well. How often do we see people and think, that's the sort of person that I want to influence me? They have this characteristic or the other. They can impact me positively this way. Because what happens, like I've got one of my really good friends, talk to multiple times a week. He works from home as well. And so when I go for my walks during the day, I can usually call him. And it's right around the time that he transitions from working in the coffee shop to working at home. So it's like a good, regular time to catch up with somebody. And since we both work from home, it's like nice to communicate, right? Really good friend. And there's a lot of great things about the friendship. One of the things about it, though, is that he and I both tend to be a little bit cynical. And so if we're not careful, we could start rubbing off on each other a little bit too much in terms of our cynicism, negative outlook on things, a little bit too critically minded of things, right? Like we start being critical on stuff, can grab a hold of you pretty quick. And so it's like, well, there's a lot of good things in this friendship, but I also recognize this problem. So thoughtfully, if I could, it's more like dumb luck for me, but if I could like try to take credit for it, then you have other friends that are positive people, who are hopeful people, who are encouraging, right? And you make sure that you try to counterbalance those sort of negative things with somebody who's going to build you up and make you better that way, right? Who's not going to return your cynicism and your critical mindedness, because those are things that I don't need to develop any further, right? Like I've got more than enough of that. I need to have more of the positivity and the thoughtfulness in my life. So you try to walk with people like that. I mean, it's a very real sort of thing that we need to be careful of, that we are making sure that we have people who influence us in the right way, that we're aware of, maybe even good friends who sometimes might lead us down a little bit of a path that we don't need to go down. So let's make sure that we don't spend too much time doing those things. We try to make sure we counterbalance it with other things in our lives. Might be a way to look at that. Because the fact of the matter is, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, right? But the companions of fools will suffer harm. It's simple, straightforward, like a lot of the Proverbs, make a world of difference to your life. Any thoughts, comments about that? Yeah.
We've heard the statement, life is what you make it. And there's a lot of truth to that. You have somebody who's had a lot of bad things happen to them in life. And they kind of use that as an excuse for not being happy and so forth. All of us have had things happen to us. Obviously, there are people who've had worse things happen, but we've all experienced bad things, but we can still be happy in life. In fact, a Christian is to have, Paul says, rejoice.
Right.
More than once. And so life is what we make it.
Yeah, life, certainly, we can construct the world around us the way that God wants us to or not, right? Like, doesn't mean that bad things won't happen, but life is what we make of it. It's how we shape those things. Take two people, right? One of them, kind of rebellious, marries a non-Christian, makes some bad choices, kind of struggles, falls away a little bit. The other one, goes by the book, right? College education, gets married, like somebody who's faithful, does all the things, right? And you look at the two. And the one looks at the other one and says, it's not fair, it was easy for you, right? It was just easier for you to have all these things, to have the family and the life and the faith and all these things. And the other person looks at the first one and says, well, you think it was easy, but look at all these different choices I made. Look at the way that I did this instead of that. It would have been easier to do what you did in that moment, but I fought through and did this other thing. I waited for this circumstance. I didn't do what, and you look at it and it's a little bit of life is what you make of it. That you make choices and they have an impact and they affect you. And a lot of those have to do with the people that you're around and the choices you want to make and who you want to surround yourself with. And it starts from an early age, But even as we get older, there's a huge amount of growth and impact that people can have on us based on who we choose to be around. Which, by the way, is a good argument for why we should come to church all the time and be around each other and come to Bible study, because it's a good opportunity to talk to one another and be influenced by other people who hopefully are great influences on us, right? And just, throw that in there. Yeah, Kevin.
I was just going to say, people tend to rise and lower to the level of the people that they're around.
Right.
From a competitive standpoint, if you want to be good in a sport, you want to be around people that are better than you because they bring you up to their level.
Right.
In life, if you hang around with fools, you're going to get dragged down to their level.
Right.
Just, by the nature of people. We tend to follow the direction of the people that we're around.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Following the directions of the people who are around. And sports providing a great example. They talk about that. Like, there are some franchises, like in football or in basketball, that just aren't being run to win. And you listen to people who are former players, who are coaches, and they'll tell you, right? Like, they don't care about winning because they don't have a culture to win. They don't bring people in that are winners. They don't want people in that are winners. They just care about selling some tickets, right? And you could tell from the top down, that's the way the organization is, and so they don't win. Whereas other organizations are consistently successful because, they care about winning, right? Like, I don't know, Pittsburgh Steelers may not win a lot of Super Bowls the last couple years, but they're consistently pretty good, right? Like, they try, although I guess there's been talks about their culture lately too, so I don't know. But in general, right, like, you see the differences, right, between those things, the way that it rubs off on others. Do you bring in veteran players who want to win? They're going to teach the young guys how to win. Do you, pass on and carry on that kind of culture or not? It's true in sports. It's true in life. What kind of people do you put yourself around and impact? So, one of the questions I put on the sheet, way we open up to people, way we talk with one another can have a huge impact on us, right? Like, the people you choose to open up to has a huge impact on you. We looked at some of these proverbs about good influences, bad influences, and stuff like that. What is the wise way to choose friends? Or maybe as part of that thoughtful question, maybe to kind of think about, how do you choose friends? And the choosing part is the interesting part, right? Because sometimes it seems like you just end up being friends with the people that are around you. You didn't have much of a choice involved in it, right? So how do you choose them, right? Like, how do you go about actually making that decision, as opposed to, these are just my peers, and so I happen to be friends with them because that's who I'm around, right? Like how do you make the distinction between that? Yeah.
Well, the old saying, birds of a feather flock together. From the time we're kids, we do the easy thing, which is we look for people who are like-minded. I like baseball. I go find friends that like to play baseball. Whatever it is. And as an adult, we tend to fall into, I want people around me that agree with me, that think my way. I don't want people always telling me, you're wrong, you gotta think. So we have to make a conscious effort to say, okay, this is who I am. Do I want to grow or do I want to stay where I'm at? And if I want to grow, then I've got to get out of that box. And I have to look for people who are going to help me improve or help me gain knowledge. Or right now with the spiritual position that we're doing here in the church, it's the same thing. You've got to look for it. You want to get smarter? Hang around with people that know more than you do. If you want to be better at something, find people that are good at that and learn from them. But we have to make an effort. And we tend not to do that. We get comfortable. I know.
Yeah.
I got real comfortable where I was.
Yeah. I think that's right. It does take effort. So talk about, I take a lunch break and exercise a little bit, and I was getting back into tennis a couple years ago, and so I wanted to find somebody to play tennis with at lunch. So I'd go down to the tennis courts and I'd hit serves and just see if anybody would show up and try and talk to him. And I saw a guy one day, an older guy, and I said, hey, can I hit with you? And he was like, yeah, I'm meeting this other guy. So I hit with these two old guys for a long time, and it was all right. One of the guys rant about stuff all the time, didn't agree with him about much, but he was a nice enough fella. He was pretty kind to me. And then he started to complain about the people at the front desk. and like rag on him all the time, say bad things about him. And I was like, I don't know if I like that. And then one day, he got suspended from the rec center for like a week or a month or something because when he went to renew, he yelled at the lady and threw his money at her and like stormed off. And you're like, oh boy. Because everybody knows you got to sign in like who you're going to play with. And so when I found out, I apologized to the lady, said, I hate that happened. And I had to make a choice, right? Is this the sort of person that you want to be associated with or not? And it's like, no. I don't want people associating me with this angry guy who's mistreating the workers for no reason. So I stopped playing tennis with him. I don't have anybody to play tennis with at lunch anymore, so I stopped playing tennis. And like, maybe that's a little bit sad, but it's kind of hurt my shoulder anyway, so it was a good excuse to stop, right? But I mean, you got to make those decisions. Like that's the hard thing, is like it takes effort. And so you decide, that's the easy thing to do, is just go play tennis with the people that are available. But maybe we need to have a higher standard as we get older of who we spend our time with. The easy thing to do is find a Facebook group of like people who like something that we like and go to some meetup and hang out with them, and those are our new friends because we all like, I don't know, dirt bike racing or something, But maybe you show up and they're not the sort of people you want to spend time with. You got to make that choice. Maybe it means you don't have anybody to go dirt bike racing with, but that's the choice you're going to make. Like that's the hard reality of these sorts of decisions, right? About the way that people influence us, is that we actually do choose, right? We don't just let things happen to us. We make a decision, and we're thoughtful about those relationships and the way that they impact us. Yeah.
But we also need to be an influence on other people. So if there are opportunities there for somebody with a bad attitude or whatever, you can, if you maintain a friendship, you can work on that.
Yeah, certainly. I do think that there is an element of being a positive influence on others, but I mean, I would argue, and I could be wrong, there's a difference between being a good influence on the people you work with and are stuck with versus going out of your way to create friendships with people who are going to be a bad influence on you. I mean, I think we always should shine our light and be a positive influence, and there's plenty of opportunities to influence people that we're around for good. That doesn't mean that we have to go out of our way to befriend them sometimes too. So, I mean, there's a fine line there, because I appreciate your point that it isn't just about isolating ourselves from the world. We still have to live within the world. But I do think that there's an element of who are we tying ourselves to as well. Yeah.
I kind of got a question, and I'll answer the question, but I kind of got a question for you. Do you ever catch yourself, like when you run into somebody, I can tell in like 5 or 10 minutes where I want to continue this conversation, maybe because of the language or something else. Do you ever catch yourself doing that? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some people you meet them and you think, this isn't the sort of person that I want to be associated with.
Sometimes I think that's, maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm not giving them a chance, I'm kind of what they call judging them early,
I mean, maybe. I think those are all just really hard choices. But we have to make judgments about who we spend time with and who we talk to and what we talk about. I mean, we're constantly making choices. And so, that's a hard thing. It's not that you're condemning them and saying they're an evil person, but maybe you just make the choice that I don't know that that's the person that I want to be spending my time talking to.
Well, the Bible talks about righteous judgment, and
Right.
so I kind of just put it over that way there.
Yeah.
But I just,
It's hard.
sometimes I feel guilty like that, when 5 or 10 minutes, and I can say, well, I really don't want to.
It's really, really hard. I mean, it's always Babylon, right? Like, it's always Babylon. And so, at what point, do we isolate ourselves? Or at what point is it casting your pearls before swine? Or at what point are you just condemning people without giving them a chance? I mean, those are all really tough choices. I can't tell you what to do in those circumstances. But, I mean, I do think that we need to make sure that we are careful to protect ourselves as well. And especially those that we love, the positive influences. It's hard. Right. Right. Was there a hand? Yep.
I really like that saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that in every relationship, even if it's people we're not hanging out with all the time, that we show that we care. And then when we get in those difficult situations, it means more that we can have an impact on these people. And that's why relationships are so essential. Because if you're just going around telling people what's right and wrong, they don't care.
Right.
If you have shown them that you really care and love their soul, they might listen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. Like, even in those circumstances where we decide this isn't somebody I'm going to go out of my way to spend time with, that doesn't mean that you have to be rude to them. I mentioned the guy I played tennis with. I never chewed him out or said anything. If I saw him again, it'd be pleasant. Maybe that was wrong of me to not tell him why I wasn't going to associate with him anymore. I don't know that it would have mattered. But you're still on a footing where if you see somebody, it's pleasant and there's something there to build from. And I think that's part of what matters, is it isn't just because you've made a choice about how you're going to spend your time doesn't mean that you have to belittle the other person or anything either in that process. Because you never know what opportunities or circumstances will present later. It's all hard, right? Like, it's all hard stuff. But for the purposes of this class, the emphasis is on making decisions to be around people that are going to positively influence us and not negatively. Yeah.
The challenge in the church, I've always thought that we have our walls that we build against Babylon, but then we carry our same walls inside the church, and we're unwilling to lower our walls and be friendly and honest with brothers and sisters who shouldn't have the same challenges as out there in the world. It's been a problem with the church for a long time, and we need to lower those walls and be more receptive to one another.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Don. Like, we're careful about who we spend time with outside of the church, but the people that are here, and I think that says something about their decision making and their choices as well. And so we need to be careful that we don't sometimes mistreat people that we're at church with because somehow we've created some sort of false perception, right? Like, people are here, like, that's a great thing. Like, we're here together. We all made the same choice today, right? Like, that's an encouraging, awesome thing. I made the comment before about coming to church. I recognize that I'm talking to the people that are at Bible class at church. Like, that's, I understand that. Like, it's one of those things, though, like, we recognize that we're here, right? Like, that there's a positiveness about those that are here, and we don't misplace those walls even amongst our brethren sometimes. Yeah, Nathan.
I apologize, before you close this out, just want to remind everyone we have group meeting here in the building immediately after services.
Group meeting here in the building right after services. Brent?
I was going to say that.
Oh, he was going to say that. All right. Well, I appreciate you all. We didn't get to my standout Proverbs this morning, but if you really want to know, I'll give them to you as we leave. But let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. If you bow with me, please. God, our Father in heaven, we're so very grateful to be your people. We're so very grateful for the chance to be here today with one another. We pray specifically this morning that you'll help us to be good friends and that you'll help us to make good choices as to who we will be friends with. We pray, Father, that we will make wise judgments when interacting with the world, that we'll make wise judgments in terms of who to spend time with and how to spend time with them, and that we'll balance appropriately the care for saving souls as well as the protection of our own, Father. We're grateful for this group here, for the family that we have, and the positive influences we can have on one another, and we pray that we will build each other up to love and good works, Father. Help us as we leave here to be prudent, wise people, and to be good friends. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, dismiss to group meetings.